the future pastors that they trained, the first place on the planet Earth that did that was Germany, with their higher criticism. And with a generation of doing that, the church had been so neutered um, that there wasn't enough spiritual and pastoral leadership to oppose the rise of the Nazis. And now it's good that there were many Catholics and Protestants who did oppose them, but you didn't see that from the leadership at the start.
Welcome to the EWTC News Podcast. The EWTC News is a ministry of Enemies Within the Church. That's where we get the E, the W, the T, and the C from Enemies Within the Church News. You can go to EWTCnews.com to view our articles. Now, what are we going to be talking about today? Today, we've got something fun and exciting. I'm interviewing Dr. Phil Fernandes, a good friend of mine. In fact, I wouldn't be saved if it wasn't for the ministry that Dr. Fernandes has been a part of in my life. But he is an expert on multiple different fields, from apologetics to the coming death of Western civilization. And today we're going to be talking about the degradation, the downfall, the decline, however you want to put it, of the Evangelical Theological Society. So Doc, and Doc is how his students refer to him. That's how I met him, so I'm going to refer to him as Doc. But Doc, before we jump into things, how are you doing today?
Not doing bad. Back issues, getting old, and just had my 64th birthday, so getting up there in years. But me and the missus are doing pretty good, hanging in there health wise, and but the church is going well, the school is going well, and I'll be finishing up my term as president of the International Society of Christian Apologetics this April. So I'll give my final presidential address there, and I think it's going to be in San Diego this year. So.
Oh, interesting. That's going to be fun. That is exciting. And I'm sure it'll be nice for you to have a little bit less on your plate for a moment. Because for people that aren't aware, let's see, you're a high school Bible and weightlifting teacher. You are the pastor of a church. You are the president of the International Society of Christian Apologetics. And you teach seminary Bible college classes. So quite a bit going on at once. And it's been a while since we've been able to talk, so I'm sure I missed probably 3 or 4 other things that you've got on your plate. So you are a busy man, and I appreciate that you were able to take some time out of your schedule to, join me here and talk about this issue. Now, for people who have no idea what we're talking about, can you give a little rundown of what the Evangelical Theological Society is, its purpose and intent in its founding, and give us a little bit of history, catching us up to more modern times, and then we'll kind of zone in on some of the issues.
Yeah, basically, I'll back it up too, because the Evangelical Theological Society was founded in the mid to late 1940s for evangelical scholarship, and it was pretty much American evangelicalism is kind of defined not just as Christian scholarship, but Christian scholarship that promotes and believes in inerrancy, the doctrine of biblical inerrancy, that the Bible in the original manuscripts is totally without error. And but going back to the 1880s at Princeton, there was this big, move. It started, with higher criticism, criticizing the scriptures, historical criticism of the scriptures. And in Princeton in the 1880s, B.B. Warfield and A.A. Hodge fought the battle and defended inerrancy and won that battle. Then in the 1930s, it uh, reared its ugly head again. There was attacks on the Bible, and it was J. Gresham Machen in the 1930s at Princeton that defended inerrancy, but realized that Princeton was toast. So he went from Jersey, where Princeton is, um, over to Philadelphia and started Westminster Seminary, and uh, and then the next battle for the Bible was in the 1970s, and that was with Harold Lindsell. His book Battle for the Bible in 1976 is still targeting some of the issues we're facing today. So, in between the 1930s battle and the 1970s battle, evangelicals realized that they needed to start a society where they could share their thought and their ideas, have peer reviewed papers, and it would be solidly evangelical,
Yeah.
solidly in the inerrancy camp. And so that was in the mid to late 1940s. And they had a doctrinal statement that you had to sign that said that you held to uh, inerrancy and inspiration of scriptures and inerrancy. And then a little bit later, they added on that you had to believe in the doctrine of the Trinity as well. And but it was just kind of assumed that you held to all the essentials of the Christian faith, plus you held to biblical inerrancy. And um, but in the 1970s at Fuller Seminary, there you started having guys. We were sending guys over to Europe, young guys to get their PhD degrees, and it's like Norman Geisler. One of the last conversations I had with him, we were having an ISCA, International Society of Christian Apologetics, conference in Dallas, and he told me how American evangelicalism was evolving into European evangelicalism. And he told me that the four differences that we have between American evangelicals and European evangelicals is that the the European evangelicals usually deny a historical Adam, or are at least open to that. They teach theistic evolution, that God used evolution. They hold to the Bible as being a kind of authoritative, but not inerrant. It has errors, and they deny eternal conscious torment. And so Dr. Geisler was saying that because we're sending so many of our young scholars over to Europe, they're coming back as European evangelicals who are questioning those things, and now they're training the next generation of pastors. And so that was already going on in the 1970s, and that's what brought about the ICBI, the International Council on Biblical Inerrancy, where Dr. Norm Geisler, Francis Schaeffer, J.I. Packer, R.C. Sproul, John Warwick Montgomery, and many other brilliant evangelical thinkers got together and put together the Chicago Statement on Biblical Inerrancy, and that was in 1978, which spelled out um, exactly what we evangelicals mean by inerrancy. And then they realized 4 years later, scholars were using hermeneutics. They're the way they interpreted the Bible. If you change the rules a little bit there, you could do damage. So they came up with the council met there to address issues of hermeneutics. And if you the only consistent hermeneutic, only consistent way to interpret the scriptures in line with inerrancy is to uh, use the um, grammatical historical approach, where you interpret it. Words have meanings. You take the
Mhm.
grammar seriously, you take the historical context seriously, and you just interpret it in that light. Whereas, you could use other grids and get what out of the scriptures, whatever you want. A guy could say, I believe in inerrancy. I believe the whole Bible is without error in the originals, but I don't believe in miracles. So I classify the genre of the entire Bible as mythology. And a guy could claim to be an inerrantist. Well, ICBI deals with that, the Chicago Statement itself, and then the statement 4 years later on hermeneutics says, no, you can't do that. You've
Mm-hmm.
got to interpret it in a natural way. And I think it's highly unlikely those four areas that European scholarship has given on, um, the traditional Christian church, um, for 2,000 years has interpreted the Bible consistently to teach creation, not theistic evolution, to teach a historical Adam and Eve, especially since Jesus and Paul believed in a historical Adam and Eve, and that the eternal conscious torment is what hell's about, not annihilation of the wicked. And so uh, so it was at that point, I think it was about 2003, where the Evangelical Theological Society decided to say, look, the way we interpret inerrancy, what we mean by inerrancy, is what the ICBI, the International Council of Biblical Inerrancy, their Chicago statement says. And and so now, as of late, we've had guys like some of these guys are my friends, and I feel bad about it, but we've had guys like Mike Lacona in his work, The Resurrection of Jesus, a new historiography, where he believes the saints did not rise when Jesus was on the cross. Um, that's just a metaphor. That's like apocalyptical language. And he believes that the soldiers didn't fall down when Jesus identified himself as the I am in John chapter 18. He believes Jesus wasn't crucified on Passover. Um, John just made that up just to give a little bit more force to what he was saying. And then in a recent book, Mike Laconi even acknowledges that the apostles could be confused. The authors of the Gospels could be confused about the details of the ladies anointing Jesus' feet or anointing him for burial. They can confuse different accounts, and that's still supposed to be consistent with inerrancy, because what Mike Lacona does is he classifies the Gospels as Greco-Roman biography, and since in Greco-Roman biography, as long as the author gets the main story correct, he can be confused about the details. Keep in mind, Greco-Roman biographers were not inspired by God, and we're not inerrant. So I mean, so to me, it's like saying, well, because they can make mistakes, the Bible authors can make mistakes, and then they're not errors. So it's kind of the new way of redefining inerrancy is we redefine what an error means. And so all of a sudden you can have confusion on details, and that's not an error anymore. You can have scientific statements and historical statements that are really become mythological statements, or like William Lane Craig now, he still holds to a historical Adam and Eve in his work, The Quest for the Historical Adam, but he now holds to what I would classify as theistic evolution. Adam was not created from the ground. Eve was not formed from his side. They both evolved from subhuman creatures, and so uh, this you can when you study the scriptures, by studying the scriptures themselves, it should help you to determine what type of genre it is. At the same time, it could have its own classification. There could be Jewish religious literature and things of that sort. But when the Bible speaks in areas of history or science, it speaks without error, even though it's not a history book or a science book. and this is kind of what these guys are getting away with today. Now, in Harold Lindsell's day in the 1970s, these guys were acknowledging that they were not inerrantists. Yet, I could show by a comparison of two books, a recent one written by Craig Blomberg on the historical reliability of the Bible, and um, Harold Lindsell's The Battle for the Bible, written in 1976, that the errantists of Lindsell's day, the 1970s, were drawing the same conclusions from the biblical text that today's inerrantists are drawing. So, what I want, I mean, it's a free country. God's given us free will. Uh, if I just want clarity and I want honesty. I
Mm,
want the Mike Laconas and the William Lane Craigs to shout from the rooftops, not to just write scholarly books that only other scholars read, um, but be open about it. If you're denying inerrancy, then they come right out and say it. Be honest about it.
yeah.
Lydia McGrew, I interviewed her numerous times, and we love her at ISCA, but she's not. She can't be a member because she's not an inerrantist.
Mm,
But what a breath of fresh air that she acknowledges that there's, like about a dozen passages that she hasn't been able to reconcile. And so she's open to the Bible containing errors. So she's not an inerrantist. Well, okay, well, then she's at least being honest and very clear about her views. And she's actually slamming the Mike Laconas and that are out there because they have less respect for the reliability of the New Testament than she does, even though they claim to be inerrantist. And so that's what I want is honesty and clarity. Um, they're not really evangelicals; they're neo-evangelicals.
mm,
Once they start watering down inerrancy, and unfortunately, because it seems that they may have won this battle in academia, I don't think intelligent lay evangelicals are ever going to embrace this. But because they won this battle in academia, they probably stole the title evangelicals, which means the
mm,
1970s evangelicals who take the Chicago Statement seriously and who still uphold inerrancy the way Augustine, Aquinas, the early church fathers, the reformers did, we're probably going to have to call ourselves conservative evangelicals just to differentiate ourselves from them. So it's really unfortunate with what's going on. And now at ETS, what's going on at the Evangelical Theological Society, as long as you sign that you hold to inerrancy, you can say the apostles are confused on details, um, and you can get away with it. And so now the inevitable has happened. Now they're having at the latest ETS conference discussions about the historical Adam. And most of the panelists, from what I've heard, do believe in a historical Adam and a historical Eve, which, so did Paul and Jesus, as the New Testament, as the New Testament attests to. Um, uh, just the fact that they're saying, hey, we need to look into this. That's usually what intellectual academic societies do. They say we need to look into this and have some panel discussions and bring in people with different views. And lo and behold, 5 to 6 years later, a significant and loud minority of your society then embraces those views, which causes you to wonder if they actually embraced them 5 or 6 years earlier,
mhm.
but weren't quite sure they should come out of the closet yet until it gained enough acceptance so they don't lose their publishing contracts or their teaching positions. But I would just like to see neo evangelicals. If you're not a true inerrantist and you're not a true American evangelical, then just acknowledge it. Be honest about it. Be clear about it. But not just the scholars, but the schools they teach at as well. So, like
Yeah.
Houston Baptist, uh, stop acting like you're an evangelical school. Just acknowledge you might have a few evangelical profs on the campus, uh, but you don't have to be an evangelical to teach there, so that we don't constantly send our young, promising future pastors. Sometimes churches will pay their way through seminary, thinking that they're going to an evangelical seminary, when instead they're going to a seminary that waters down inerrancy. And then the
Hmm.
guy comes back and gets hired by an evangelical church. And you got a guy, his wife, and 3 kids. And within a few months, they realize he doesn't believe what we believe.
Yeah.
And so, whether you're a church, a seminary, or a Bible college, or a professor, you need to come clean. Be clear about what you believe and be honest about it. And these guys do not. They're redefining what an error is,
Yep.
um, but claiming to be an errantist, and I just don't think that that's the honest way of dealing with it.
Yeah. And that, I mean, we shouldn't expect people. Now, you hope for it. You hope for honesty among people that claim to be Christians, that claim to hold to a actual robust theological uh, Christian worldview. But when they're diving into errors, we shouldn't expect them to be honest. It's refreshing. It's nice. It allows you to actually get things done.
You know?
But the reality is, the majority of people that being dishonest are being dishonest because they have more to gain by being dishonest than they do by being honest.
Yeah, and
Um,
it's probably too a temporary ambiguity and a temporary dishonesty
mhm,
until it gets safe. And but so they're starting to be honest and clear about their views because they're confident that they're not going to get pushback, especially with
yep.
the death of the founder of Defending Inherency website and ISCA, International Society of Christian Apologetics, Dr. Norman Geisler, who died in 2019. He was the most famous scholar who was opposing this, and so we suspected that with his passing, that there'd be more courage. So now they're kind of having the courage to be honest and clear, and so that it looks like American evangelicalism has become European evangelicalism. They have members who deny eternal conscious torment and who are theistic evolutionists, the biologos movement, and deny William Lane Craig now is what I would call a theistic evolutionist. But then you also have the biologos movement, which also denies a historical Adam and Eve. The first 11 chapters of Genesis are just mythology and all. So with that change that's gone on, if they're just clear and honest about it, we can say, okay, we need to shake the dust off our sandals. And if you're a true inerrantist, join ISCA. But now we're getting another bit of lack of clarity and lack of honesty because now they want to revise the Chicago statement. I think what they should do, come out to Seattle, get together and come up with the Seattle statement. But by trying to revise the Chicago statement, and you could just change a few words in a few places, and you'll make it say the exact opposite of what it was saying. And like Chicago statement says, you cannot use genre criticism to turn historical passages into mythological passages, and to I mean, the Chicago statement is very clear that evolutionary science is not taught in the Bible, and these guys want to be able to
Yeah.
teach that, but by revising the Chicago statement, it makes it look like these guys are being faithful to what the Schaeffers and the Geislers and the Sproul's fought, a hill they were willing to die on, the battle they fought in the late 70s and the early 80s, when in reality, they're basically undoing what they did. So again,
Yeah.
if they want to be honest and clear, go to Seattle or go to San Francisco or whatever, and come up with the Seattle statement on biblical inerrancy, which really would be a statement as how you can dodge inerrancy and redefine it.
Yeah.
But by revising the Chicago statement, it's going to cause so much confusion. People are going to say, "Well, I adhere to the Chicago statement." And we say, "Which one? 1978 or 2025 or 2024 or whatever it is?" And we've seen that with Baptists when they'll come up with a new creed or a new statement of faith, and if you don't get the right date, you don't fellowship with the guy. I mean, that's crazy. But I think we can appreciate the work of these scholars. Let me tell you something that okay, I speak with a lot of big name guys at conferences, not as much as I used to, and I don't want to mention the name of this guy. He's a really neat guy, one of the biggest names in Christian apologetics today. And I went out to eat with him and the other speakers at the conference. And I took him aside and told him, the school that you teach at, are you on board with what these guys are doing with their watering down on inerrancy? And he responded to me by saying, well, I'm not pleased with it. But they're all great guys and they do great research. Now, he's correct. They are great guys. These are nice guys to hang out with. They do great research. Okay. But what he's basically telling me was, I hope you guys, who are pretty much being blacklisted, but I hope you guys win this battle for the Bible because I'm rooting for you and I agree with you. But I need to network. I don't want to rock the boat.
Yeah.
I'm part of the good old boys club, so I don't have the courage to fight this battle. I hope you guys do. Another leading apologist uh, told me, who's really good friends with some of these guys that are doing this, told me it's not a battle I'm called to fight. And, we've got to draw a distinction. Many apologists are called to defend mere Christianity, essential Christianity, and that's great. But if you call yourself an evangelical apologist, it means that you believe in more than just mere Christianity. It means you also have a robust view of inerrancy, a biblical
Yeah.
inerrancy. And so just because you don't feel led to defend, I don't. When I do apologetics, very rarely do I get to the stage, unless I'm teaching a course in apologetics, do I get to the stage in defending biblical inerrancy. Most of the time, defending absolute truth, um, uh, the existence of a personal God, the possibility of miracles, responding to the problem of evil, and then giving historical evidence for Jesus' resurrection and deity. I mean, once you get to that point, just read what Jesus said, and you got biblical inerrancy. He bases a whole argument with the Sadducees on the tense of the verb. He said, I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So those guys, he's the God of the living. Those guys are still alive hundreds of years after their death. So the Sadducees, who didn't believe that, he refuted them just on the tense of the verb. And whatever the case, but that's I could give you a list. I'm not going to, but I could give you a list of guys that then they themselves, leading apologists, that they themselves are very strong on inerrancy, but they're not going to call out their buddies because they don't want to rock the boat. And it's really, really unfortunate to see these guys who have the courage to debate atheist scholars. Their friendship with their buddies is more important than defending inerrancy. And Norman Geisler summed it up as a lot of them they they long for academic respect more. They desire that more than pleasing God. and it's really, really, unfortunate. Now, I think we could read these guys' work and benefit from it, and when they get something right, quote them. When they get it wrong, quote them and refute them. Um, but I want honesty and clarity. If you're not a true inerrantist, just acknowledge it, okay? And but we're not getting that, and if they do revise the Chicago Statement, and in a few areas, the most important areas, it's going to end up saying the exact opposite
Yeah.
of what the intenders, what um, the original um, committee, what they actually said. It's going to say the exact opposite
Yeah.
of what they intended it to say.
Yeah, which is I mean, it's a bait and switch that happens all the time. Hey, we don't fit into this statement, this document, whatever it is. Let's subvert it by suggesting reasonable updates.
Mm-hmm.
It's always presented in a positive way. Now, a question I have, because here, enemies within the church, our biggest focus has always been on wokeness. And what we mean when we say wokeness is cultural Marxism, and
Mm-hmm.
specifically critical theory and its derivatives, critical race theory, queer theory, all those different things.
Yeah.
Um, that's something. Those are totally different, totally divorced. Cultural Marxism, critical theory. That's totally divorced from what we're talking about here. Correct or incorrect?
Uh, Incorrect, because you have an awful lot of different quote unquote evangelical scholars that want to water down inerrancy in different ways. And some of them, it's the grid through which they interpret the scriptures, it's their hermeneutic. So if you basically have a critical race theory hermeneutic, and you could still claim to hold to inerrancy, but you're going to say, well, that passage doesn't say that, it says this. And, it used to be liberation theology in
Hmm.
Central and South America and in South Africa, um, where the Marxists knew that if you can't beat them, join them. If you can't beat Christianity, let's infiltrate and take over. And so,
Yep.
liberation theology, Jesus was the greatest Marxist revolutionary who ever lived, and he came to earth to deliver the poor from the evil business owners. And so I think that kind of contributed to the foundation of a well. In fact, that was, I mean, see, the whole reason for neo Marxism, cultural Marxism, was because economic Marxism failed. Everybody knew Europe was going to go into war and at the First World War, but Marx predicted that the workers would not put on the uniform and go to battle for their countries. They would instead use that as an opportunity to revolt and overthrow the business owners. That didn't happen. And so, what was wrong? And with the critical mark, the neo Marxist said was, "Well, what's wrong is that Marx was right. Religion is the opium of the people, but it's good opium, and they're not going to revolt against the business owners because they think, well, I'll go to heaven if I'm a nice little obedient business owner. I mean, business worker. If I'm a worker and I obey my bosses, and so they're not going to revolt. So what we've got to do is infiltrate religion. We've got to take the pillars of Western civilization, whether it's religion, the media, the schools, the universities, um, government. We've got to infiltrate, and rather than revolution, through evolution, take
Mm.
over. And so that this was out of the Frankfurt School in Germany, and then um, the Nazis kicked them out because they were, you know, both fighting for the same piece of meat. And the
Yeah.
Nazis were National Socialists. The cultural Marxists are international socialists. They don't have any faithfulness to any one country. And so they came. um, to New York and through Columbia University began to change the whole method of the whole philosophy of education in
Yeah.
America, and so we see this going through now. Now, by the way, I will say this: what's going on the national level. I fought those battles. I had the privilege of fighting some of those battles on the county level, Kitsap County, the Human Rights Council meetings. Uh, they weren't all called the same things. Nobody was saying they were woke. But
Yeah.
anytime I quoted from the Declaration of Independence about all men being created equal and inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, I was shut down because, well, the response was this was somebody who had earned a master's degree on the council. Um, well, why should we listen to them? They're nothing but a bunch of white male Christians. And so it was kind of
To be
like
clear, how long ago was that you're referring to things like that
early
happening?
to mid 1990s. And see, this is the reason why. Okay, here's where I get slammed. You know how I get slammed. You know me. We go back a long way, and I get slammed as being when I talk about what's coming down in the future, like a regional meeting in Oregon, in Portland, Oregon, of all places. I presented my paper, "The Coming Death of Western Civilization," and Stanley Grenz, a postmodern quote unquote evangelical, and two of his guys butt heads with me, and two other guys took my side, and it turned out they were J.P. Moreland students from Biola and Talbot School of Theology. But I was called a kook, and all I was
Yeah.
doing was just taking what C.S. Lewis said in The Abolition of Man and Francis Schaeffer said in his work Back to Freedom and Human Dignity, where he coined the phrase the death of man, and say, look, this is the deification of the state and the death of man. And that was in 1998. In fact, I wrote a book in 1987, The Decay of a Nation, The Need for National Revival. Only 330 copies were in print, where I said I didn't think we can get past the year 2020 and retain our freedom without widespread revival. So when we shut down the churches in
Oh.
2020, I wasn't like real surprised when the government shut down the churches. Last I heard, Christ is the head of the church, not the state. But go tell that to our government. And so whatever the case, I was always viewed as the kook when I would use what I consider like, you read the Bible, read your newspaper, and you've got a prophetic voice. And so I just use, the church should have a prophetic voice about, hey, things are going to come down, like Francis Schaeffer and C.S. Lewis said. And, but I'd be called a kook by my fellow Christian colleagues. Now, when they did shut down the church in 2020, I did start getting an awful lot of apologies. Phone calls, emails from some guys I knew they were bad mouthing me. Others, they talked behind my back and I didn't know it, but they felt so guilty. They confessed to me and said, "Hey, I'm sorry," and this and that. But when I talk about what Yuval Noah Harari is saying in Homo Deus, it's in my lecture, "The Arrival of Nietzsche's Supermen: The Consequences of a World Without God." When I
Which is a
talk about the agenda,
shockingly good
it,
lecture.
yeah, and it's now I'm being called the kook again by the same guys who are apologizing. And I'm not saying that this stuff's going to come down. I'm saying this is what Bill Gates and Klaus Schwab of the World Economic Forum and even our this present administration,
Mm.
um, net zero, their goal. They keep talking about it. John Kerry keeps talking about it. President Biden keeps talking about it. Well, that means you don't own private vehicles. You're only allowed to travel within 15 minutes of your house through public transportation. You can't eat meat anymore. And I think they want to ration the toilet paper that we have. That doesn't sound like a future most Americans would enjoy. And but whatever the case, so I usually get called a kook when I talk about the future. But because I continue to defend and contend for the faith once for all delivered to the saints, I also get a lot of pastors and professors who raise their eyebrows and act like I'm not relevant, I'm antiquated, I'm outdated, and um, and so I just think we need more courage, especially among apologists. We need more courage and boldness to stand up for inerrancy. And but yeah, even with critical race theory, they've got their own hermeneutical grid, and through which they interpret the scriptures. So if you get away from the grammar and the historical context of the scriptures, you can make the Bible say anything you want it to say, and that's what a lot of people are doing. And we got Moody Bible Institute in Chicago had guys doing that, and they had to shut down and then reopen and force guys to sign a statement, doctrinal statement espousing inerrancy. But a few of their guys said, "Yeah, I just signed it because I needed the job." So,
And
so
they're
that's a really
Moody's
really
now way
unfortunate.
off the
It was
deep end.
interesting though, the coming death of Western civilization. It was interesting that I presented that paper in Polsbo, because when we're not, when you watch the news now, you're not watching the coming death of Western civilization. You're watching the death of Western civilization. And
Yeah.
a lot of those riots started right there in Portland, Oregon, where I gave that talk. So that might, I don't know, God's the one who knows, but there might have been more than just a coincidence there. So
A little bit of a not prophetic in the sense of predicting the future, but prophetic in the sense of declaring God's coming judgment in a
yeah, and
location where that
most of
judgment's going to fall.
yeah, and and you get the prophetic books, the five major prophets, 12 minor prophets, and you got an awful lot of predictions of the future, but you also have an awful lot of warnings. In fact, I'd say there's probably more
Hmm.
warnings than predictions that don't go down this road. It's not going to end well, and so we need to proclaim those warnings like Jonah did, and maybe the people
Hmm.
will repent. But if we're not going to shout out the warnings, I mean, you get called a kook if you just read what these billionaire globalists say they want, or if you just quote what Elon Musk says that they tell him they want, you get called a kook just for quoting these guys. So, and there's a book out of, I don't agree with everything that's in it. You got a lot of different authors, a lot of different opinions, but COVID-19 Dystopian Delusion, um, edited by Scott Venturera, a Canadian philosopher. I wrote the second chapter in that book about the Great Reset and the New World Order, where I updated my thinking on the subject and applied it to the way the government dealt with COVID. And um, so, if you just look into that book and the chapter I wrote there, you'll see where things are heading. But it's just like, we're so afraid to be called a conspiracy theorist, that we won't even talk about the stuff. So
Yeah.
we have a see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil mentality in the church. And if Christian apologists aren't going to sound the alarm, I don't know who's gonna. And it's
Yeah.
really, really unfortunate that we don't have the courage to do so.
Well, and that's what's concerning about the downfall of an organization like Evangelical Theological Society is
Mhm.
people that should be at the forefront. It really, in a lot of ways, it's like, the vanguard of an army just kind of walking away, half of them joining the enemy, half of them just refusing to fight. And the more vulnerable troops behind have no idea that just happened. They have no idea the massive force that's about to slam into them. But
Yeah,
at this
it's
point, we kind of do, because we have been starting to get hit, but still
yeah,
people are just looking at the ground and saying it doesn't exist. It's not real.
yeah. Yeah, and I mean, just on the battles for the Bible, 1880s, 1930s, 1970s, and then about 2010, it became evident that ETS was not going to punish its disobedient children. In fact, they were going to be the new rock stars. So, what that pretty much tells
Yeah.
you, every generation, about every 30 or 40 years, you need a back to the Bible movement. You
Hmm.
need a reformation. And yeah, I'm telling you, the first place on the planet Earth where higher criticism destroyed their seminaries, and then the future pastors that they trained, the first place on the planet Earth that did that was Germany with their higher criticism. And with a generation of doing that, the church had been so neutered um, that there wasn't enough spiritual and pastoral leadership to oppose the rise of the Nazis.
Yep.
And now it's good that there were many Catholics and Protestants who did oppose them, but you didn't see that from the leadership at the start,
Yep.
and it creates a vacuum. The church is supposed to be the conscience of a nation. Like, I don't consider myself Republican or Democrat. I don't even call myself an independent. I just I just believe the Bible is God's word. And so, like, for instance, when the Republicans after 9/11 were real big with the Patriot Act, I was opposing that because I didn't want a police state. But I'm also going to oppose the Democrats, and they just got to. The whole party platform is godless at this point, and so we should be the conscience of a nation, not a branch of a political party. And I think that's one area where the evangelical church went wrong. We thought getting politically involved is great,
Yep.
uh, but we thought we could um, change a culture by changing laws and changing leaders. And though changing laws and changing leaders are good, the best way to change a culture is by changing hearts. And
Yep.
there's no better way to change hearts than through the preaching of the gospel and discipleship. And so I think we need more political activism. At the same time, we need to increase our evangelistic efforts and our
Yeah.
discipleship efforts, a thousandfold. And by the way, there's probably a lot of pastors listening to me right now and thinking, boy, I'm glad he didn't see our church. We only have 30 people in our church, and we haven't led somebody to the Lord in a while, and this and blah blah. Let me tell you something. If it's the reason you got only 30 people in your church might be because you're preaching the word of God and you're not compromising. Most big churches get to be big churches by um, by if uh, grabbing warriors, spiritual warriors from little churches and turning them into spectators in the big churches. Now, there are some big churches
Mhm.
that are preaching the word and doing a great job, but it's hard.
Yeah.
Um, but basically, uh, it's not. I'm not saying I think we need, through evangelistic efforts and discipleship, we need, uh, uh, 25,000 more mega churches in the next 5 years. No, in mega churches, it's very difficult to disciple. Most of the
Yep.
discipleship happens in home fellowships and small churches. So the bigger you get, the more you have to delegate that authority and figure out how you're going to disciple people. Jesus only made a disciple 12 guys, and one was a traitor. I think Jesus got help with discipling the other 72 from the apostles. Probably gave each apostle six guys as disciples. So I really feel sorry for the six guys who got stuck with Judas. But whatever the case, um, no, I think we need more small churches and house churches planted that aren't going to give on these issues, no matter what Mr. PhD says, no matter what apologetic rock stars, what my friend, the brilliant Professor Donald Williams, what he calls He's a former ISCA president. He calls it the apologetics industrial complex, and so it's a good old boys club, and we gotta stand against it. But I would love to see more and more smaller churches that don't, that's. I'll be honest with you. The passage that the Lord has really hit me with lately is from Galatians. Don't grow weary in doing good.
Mm,
But I'm getting weary. You mentioned all 2 full-time jobs, pastoring a church, teaching at a Christian high school, college concurrent credit courses, doing some college work online and through Veritas International University, and then still taking speaking engagements now and then. And so I thought, well, don't grow weary in doing good. I'm getting weary. I'm just going to focus on the church and the high school and give up on the international and the national stuff. And that might be what God wants me to do. But my wife's she's kind of got more discernment than me. She wants me to get back in the game and start ruffling some feathers and start taking debates again. And so just be in prayer with me on that. But for those pastors that are listening out there, that it's like, no, my mission field is my church, and I've got 30 members, and 25 of them are 70 years old. Hey, disciple those people. It's all the Great Commission is not evangelism; it's discipleship. Now, before you can disciple people, you got to lead them to Christ.
yeah,
But our goal is not to lead somebody to Christ and then let that spiritual babe be an orphan. Our goal is to not just lead people to Christ, but to disciple them to spiritual maturity. And so evangelism is just one of the beginning stages. Now we need
yeah,
pre evangelism and planting seed and building relationships with people who are so depersonalized because of this computer age.
yeah.
But you're not done when you lead somebody to Christ. Now you're responsible to be a spiritual parent and to see to it that they get discipled, and so they can grow spiritually in the Lord.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, people talk about the crisis of fatherlessness in this country,
Hmm.
but far too often, before it happens in the home, it's happened
Hmm.
in the church.
Hmm.
When the churches became, spiritual deadbeat dads,
Yeah.
creating spiritual babies and not discipling them and taking care of them and nurturing them into
Yeah.
robust truth, what else should you expect? They don't know what
Yeah.
to do.
Yeah.
There's they're not going to be effective. They're not going to be having an impact in society, and society is going to go downhill. So we
Yeah.
really do need that effective discipleship if we want to turn things around. But you are right. We also need that engagement. We need to engage with our culture, engage with society, engage in
Yeah.
politics at the
Yeah.
same time. Now,
Yeah.
I've said this before, and it does come down to this. It's going to take that political engagement right now. It's going to take a lot of it, and it's going to be just holding back the tide until we can do that effective evangelism, that effective discipling, and get a generation of people that are robustly discipled to where votes can start to change, votes can start to swing. But
Yeah.
without those people, in a country that votes without numbers, you got nothing.
Yeah.
So we
Yeah.
need to
No.
get those numbers too.
Yeah. It's really weird too, because there's the Essenes of Jesus's day, they just withdrew. God's going to judge
Yep.
Jerusalem. We just need to withdraw, kind of live like the Amish, just communal lifestyle in the Dead Sea area, in the Qumran community. The Zealots, many of them went overboard. They're Jewish patriots. Many of them were probably borderline terrorists and insurrectionists. Is kind of like New Jersey trying to overthrow the United States. They were, Israel trying to overthrow the Roman Empire, and and I think there's got to be a little bit of the Essenes in all of us, and a little bit of the Zealots in all of us. Now, obviously, I'm not calling for physical violence, But like the Zealots, we've got to be very passionate about engaging our culture and fighting these battles. Um, and it's not like I'm saying you got to win the culture war. We lost the culture wars. I don't know how, and we lost them a lot earlier than we thought because if there's a culture war still going on, how come the Christians are forced through taxation to pay for an anti-Christian education of children, even if you don't put your kids in the government-run schools? And then if you want Christian education, well, it's a free country, but you got to pay for that out of your pocket. So it just seems to me we've been on the losing end for a long time, but we still got to battle. Stand up for what is right just because it's
Mm,
right. Stand up for what is true just because it's true. So we've got to have a little bit of the zealot in us. At the same time, when it comes to raising our children, um, when it comes to discipling our families, we got to have a little bit of the Essenes in us to where we say, we got to come out of Babylon the Great. And basically, what I'm talking about is homeschooling and building that core group of friends who are on fire for the Lord. Yes,
hmm.
you go out and you witness to your community and stuff. And we're gonna need more and more Christian employers, Christian businesses. Um, I mean, if you didn't feel led to get a certain medical procedure, by the way, we got canceled on YouTube for me mentioning certain words. But if you didn't
Yeah,
agree with a certain medical procedure, you could lose your job. And I knew many people that did lose their jobs. And
yeah,
had the government continued to push for that, um, the only possibility of having a job, the end goal of that would have been you'd have to be hired by Christians. And so we need to be a little bit more serious about all aspects of society. But there's cultural engagement, but there's also a time to withdraw. And I think when it comes to educating the kids, you know, my wife and I were homeschool fans, and my wife homeschooled my daughter back in the mid 1980s. So this wasn't new to us. In fact, one year that we did it, it was illegal. They came up with a Washington state law. You had to have at least a 2-year degree before um, you could homeschool, and and I hadn't finished my uh, associate degree through Liberty University at that point, and then when I did finish it, they changed the rule again. Said you had to have a state certified teacher overseeing what you did. So Bremerton Christian School, which later became King's West, which is now Cross Point, where I teach now, Bremerton Christian School says we've got certified teachers. If the homeschoolers want to come for a small fee, our teachers can oversee the work. You report to them, once a month or once a week. And but there was a year where we actually did it illegally because we thought that it would be godless to just take our kids and put them in the government-run schools. And
yeah,
so there's a time when we say, look, we've got to separate ourselves, and there's a time to engage. And that's why it was so. I think it's much more complex being a Christian today than it was during the gospel period in the book of Acts, because you had no political say. So it's just like, okay, well, what do I do? Well, I just do what the Bible tells all Christians to do. But
I
when
think
you get
I think it's
political,
you that told me this story of talking with a pastor in a persecuted area, and he asked you to
yeah,
pray for him, and you started to pray that the persecution would cease, and he interrupted you.
mhm,
He's like, "No, no, no, we're doing great. Pray that
yeah,
we're faithful through it. It's
yeah,
making the church
he prayed
thrive."
that we'd be faithful through the persecution, and that Jesus would comfort them in the midst of their persecution. He told me not to pray that the persecution would stop, but he did also, these guys would treat me because they were smuggling my stuff into the Middle East and the other one into African nations. And this is the old audio cassette days. And um, but when they finally met me and we had a meeting in Minnesota, um, they treated me like I was the Apostle Paul or Isaiah or something. And these guys could take off their shirts and show wounds, um, scars on their backs from the beatings they had received while being imprisoned and tortured for their faith. But they treated me like I was a spiritual giant for giving them, I don't know, I think it was back then about 700 of my lectures on audio cassettes. And they put it on MP3 format, at least the guy who was getting them to Saudi Arabian uh, secret Christian airplane pilots. Nobody checks them. And then they would get it on the MP3 format, on CDs, first one third Arabic music, the next one third one of my lectures, the last one third Arabic music. So doctors and lawyers who had secretly converted to Christianity in Muslim countries would um, listen to the lectures in their cars, and then once a week would secretly meet in the home small group and discuss what they learned. And that's how they trained their pastors. And so they would fly the stuff in through the Christian pilots, um, whose stuff wasn't being checked, and in Saudi Arabia. And then I called him Salam. I didn't want to know his real name. Salam is the Arabic word for peace. And then it was his job to smuggle them into different um, Muslim nations. He had done some prison time in Egypt for doing that. And whereas in the Sudan, in refugee camps, they would listen to the audio cassettes, they'd wind it. So if a guy wound it fast, I'd have a high pitched voice. If he wound it slow, it'd be deeper and more gravelly than it is right now. And with them in the Sudan, it was just they'd show the Jesus film and dub it in their language, and 10,000 people would get saved. So they'd ask for a show of hands who can speak and read English, and whoever raised their hands, they got ordained. Whether of all the converts, it was kind of scary, kind of crazy, and then they'd make them listen to my lectures and stuff. And I'm sure they got other stuff for free. I was shocked they had a difficult time finding stuff for free, and in India gave Dr. Philip John um, uh, 700 of my lectures for free. And he put it on the MP3 format, and they used that for Trinity School of Apologetics over there. Um, but these guys, when they see me, they would treat me like I was a spiritual giant. I tell them, guys, my faith has not been tested yet. Your faith has been tested, and but they both said, "Oh yeah, but we pray for America. It's coming soon." These are
Mm.
guys I was talking to in the late 1990s, early 2000s, and they saw the writing on the wall, and so
Yeah.
they felt indebted to America because so many churches all over the world, whether it's South Korea or African nations or Central and South American nations or Asian nations, so many of them, it was Americans that came and preached the gospel to them. And so they feel real bad that things are going down here in America. So, but that's one of the lies that's out there. The average Christian is some white male European American, and it's like no, it's probably 8 or 9 out of every 10 uh, uh, Bible believing born again Christians on planet Earth today. Whatever he or she is not a white guy, and so that's a big lie. I think right now the African continent is between 47 and 50% Christian. Unfortunately, the other half is either Muslim or communist, and so now we just added over 100 Christian brothers and sisters in Nigeria that were slaughtered by Muslims, and that kind of stuff goes on all the time out there. But
Yeah.
um, But yeah, the real, you know, our faith is going to be tested here in America, and you know, and you know my stance on the subject. I really hope and pray that pre-tribbers are right, but I think they're wrong. I hold to historic premillennialism, and I think we're going to even go through the tribulation. But even my pre-trib brothers would admit that Americans will probably suffer greatly even before the tribulation period. But we got to prepare our people for suffering. You know, I used to preach and try to teach our people how to live for Jesus. Now I find myself preaching and telling the people that I love, trying to instruct them from God's word how to suffer and die for Jesus.
Yeah, and that's I mean, that sounds like dramatic and like a big thing, but that's the reality. That's the historic reality of standing for Christ. And
Yeah,
that's something that we've been insulated from, but it's a reality we need to be aware of. We need to understand. Um, but this has been a truly amazing conversation and a half, I should say. I think we really covered a lot of good ground at answering several different things that are going on. Now, one thing in closing I want to mention, because Nigeria was brought up, always have to plug uh, Equipping the Persecuted. The director of Enemies Within the Church, Judd Saul, he runs a ministry in Nigeria ministering to those persecuted Christians. And if you follow Equipping the Persecuted, if you follow his website, truthnigeria.com, you'll know that it's a lot more than just a
hmm
few hundred over the Christmas season that were killed. It's
yeah,
constant. And
yeah,
so I would
yeah,
encourage you, if you want to do something, because you can actually get involved in helping persecuted Christians directly, direct aid, not any of this fluff, not any of this take pictures and then go back to the safe areas. No, they're on the grounds where the difficulties are, where people are actually being murdered for their faith, and they're responding, they're taking
yeah,
care of them, providing aid, providing advanced warning. So go to equippingthepersecuted.org and consider supporting your persecuted brothers and
yeah,
sisters in around the world.
yeah,
But Doc, it's been amazing to get to talk with you. I really hope this has helped people out there understand a little bit more, get a clearer picture on what's going on in society, on how some of these issues could creep into the church, and just see that it's not one area. There's not one. It's not there's a single floodgate that opened and everything poured through that.
yeah,
There's been a across the board coordinated effort. It's been a cancer that was very intentionally injected into Christianity over time in every location so that it could develop and erode the roots so that they could push a evil agenda forward.
yeah, yeah.
But again, it's pleasure having you on, and until next time everyone, remember, for the sake of your soul, don't go woke.